Uy, kuyugi ko, nganong di man ka. Kuyugin ako, bisan dili ko gwapa. Kahibalo ko, mustorya sa kaagi sa una. Sa mga bayani, nagigira lang para sa kuma. Isog mo dasma, andam mo away mamatay. Unsa ka pa, umanggi atay. Kuyogi lagi ko, di man ko mamugos. Kuyog ang mukha ko sa kagahapon ni umabot. Kuyogi lagi ko, di man ko mamugos. Kuyog ang mukha ko sa kalayo ni tupas. Andam daw ba ng subo para malingkawas kuyog nimo. Magkuyog na ta, pagdali na diha. Ngano di ay, nganong di man kaganahan. Kupta na to, ang sundang nila pula-po. Leon kilat, flores sa gargadyo. Tasma, andam mo away mamatay. Ulipon sa gugma, gugmang di atay. Kuyogi lagi ko, di man kumamukos. Kuyog ang mukha ko sa kagahapon ni umabot. Kuyogi lagi ko, di man kumamukos. Kuyog ang mukha ko sa kalayo ni tupas. Andam daw ba ng subo para malingkawas kuyog nimo. Hindi ko nimo kuyugan, inunti kang palawan. Hindi nakakatilaw sa humba o kinilaw. Kuyogi lagi ko, di man ko mamugos. Kuyog ang mukha ko sa kagahapon ni umabot. Kuyogi lagi ko, di man ko mamugos. Kuyog ang mukha ko sa kalayo ni tupas. Andam daw ba ng sabon para malingkawas kuyog nimo. Kuyog nimo. Kuyog nimo.
They say looks can be deceiving. At first glance, I thought you were not much to look at. All icing, no cake, all steam, not much brew. But the night air sings of fulfilling ancient dreams. The moon whispers of tenderness for the smallest of them, for the unheard, the unseen. And as the sun breaks through our heroes' memories, your blinding smile hits my heart, like the warrior's blade, like Lapu-Lapu's spear. But the far seas beckon you. The memories on these walls try to soothe the pain of parting. I seek for your warmth, but only these sheets comfort me. My tears are salt water flowing to bridge the seas and islands that divide us. The stars listen to my sighs as I look for you in the skies. And now you're here. Our love blazes like the fire of our heroes' revolution. Our hearts entwined is such sweet victory, incomparable, like the journey of our people, like the richness of our culture.
A happy Lunar New Year to everyone. In celebration of this year of the Black Water Rabbit, Congress the Cebu Heritage Hotel, in partnership with the University of San Carlos Center for Social Research and Education, Flag Tour Guides, Museum Sugbo or the Cebu Provincial Museum, the Central Visayas Association of Museums, the Andy Heritage Center, and so on 2020 present to you this event, this hybrid event, ININSIK GYOD, the Chinese influence in Cebuano life. Daghang salamat for being with us once again to those on site and also to those online. Thank you very much for joining us in this very exciting conversations this afternoon in celebration of the Lunar New Year. So it is the the black water. It is the year of the black water rabbit. So we are wishing you a of fortune, good health, and prosperity in this new year. So of course, sana all, no? Sana all prosperous and happy in this new year. So we always have a wellspring of hope for our leaders in our community to always follow and emulate our heroes, as you have seen in our countdown, that we always want everyone to go with us back to our history, to our past, and witness the bravery of our heroes and our warriors. So right now, we are still going back. We are traveling back in time this afternoon. Going back to pre-colonial times, Spanish time Cebu, and we journey also with the Chinese mestizos in Cebu in contemporary times. So stay tuned for these um, enlightening conversations and exciting, fun conversations with our resource persons, one of which is based right now in the freezing Wisconsin in the university in the United States, and one also is with us on site, a Chinese mestiza who will tell us about the world, the heartbreaks, the pains and joys of being a Chinese mestizo. So it is not all roses in the world of the Chinese mestizo. There are trials and struggles, and there would be someone, one of our resource persons would be telling us the stories about this. So we also invite you to give your questions to our resource person who is a Cebuano by heart, but who is based in the US right now because it is 1 a.m. in their place. So, daghang salamat to those online. So, Thank you to 𝗏𝘃𝗀𝗏, the president of the tour guides organization, Daniel Nino Paclihan, also to Ferdinand Ascaraga, who is with us on site and online. 𝗏𝙗𝙗𝙗 Masinag. So 𝗏𝙗𝙗𝙗 is a goddess of Visayan Diwata, 𝗏𝙗𝙗𝙗, god of the sun. So the name is 𝗏𝙗𝙗𝙗. Jojo Senal, Rodora, and Ferdi from the Taguig City and Pateros. So we are we also, while we are thank you to our executive director of the 𝗕𝙗𝙗𝗀 Heritage Center, our health and heritage advocate, and UP Cebu professor Roxanne Doron, also for being with us on site. Hope your students will also watch. So we are celebrating this month or this year, the new year, the Lunar New Year, and we also celebrated earlier this month the Sinulog 2023. And thank you, by the way, we would like to thank those who were with us in our event, Santo Niño versus the Diwata. It was well watched online. It has now 9,000 views online. On the spot, we only had just 1,000 views on the spot while we were doing it. But after, they were so interested in knowing about the Diwata fighting against the Santo Niño. And also, we thank also My Cebu, the blogger, digital journalist Max Limpag for sharing this event today. And we also mentioned his news report about the beginnings of the Sinulog. Um, so there were actually so many discussions about when did Sinulog start. So Max Limpag has been so witty in his sharing of news articles from the Bagong Kusog. So thank you to our partners in our event, as mentioned, the USC Center for Social Research and Education, the tour guides plug, also Museo Sugbo, the Cebu Provincial Museum. So this is now this is now being broadcast. This event is now being broadcast in the pages of Museo Sugbo and the Central Visayas Association of Museums, the 𝗕𝙗𝙗 Heritage Center, 𝗖𝗵𝘂𝗏 2020. So, daghang salamat for partnering with us all the time. So, we also thank our participants, those who registered online and who said going to this event. It's not here they did not register in our form, but we have from the University of Hawaii professor joining us, also from the a page with the administrators who are Canada-based, Visayan Culture with 𝗏𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗃. Thank you for sharing this event to your page. And also from Luzon, we have teachers and the supervisor of the 𝗕𝗴𝗏𝗏 Schools Division of Taguig City and Pateros. We have someone from the Philippine Women's University. We have someone from UP Diliman and also from PUP. And from the Visayas, we have someone from the CTU, Cebu Technological University main campus. We have also tour guides from FLAG Incorporated. We have someone from University of San Jose Recoletos, from the Philippine Statistics Authority. We also have someone from the Philippine Medical Association. Daghang salamat to our doctors who are with the Philippine Medical Association for joining this event, knowing about the history of the Chinese and Chinese mestizos in Cebu. And also someone from the 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏 Cebu, and also from the University of San Carlos, and also from the Cebu Doctors University Hospital. So I guess there are so many Chinese who are doctors, right? So that's why we have doctors who are joining us right now. So online, may I have the registration also of those online. So please write the hashtag ININSIK GYOD, or hashtag Chinese in Cebu, or hashtag Chinese influence, or hashtag ININSIK GYOD or hashtag Lunar New Year so that we would be able to recognize you in our Facebook Live. So we have also Charles C. watching from Guadalupe. Daghang salamat, Charles, Sheshe, for being with us. And so please join us in these conversations with our historian and also our Chinese Mestiza panelists. So we have from FLAG, we have from the Cebu Association of Tour Guides, aside from FLAG. We have also descendants from the World War II, sons and daughters of World War II veterans. We also have from La Liga Cebu Reactors. And we have someone from realliance.ph, Andrea Way. Where is Andrea? Is it your first time to join us? Yes. Welcome. Ayong pag-abot. Welcome to our event. So there are other names here and then there is also the F. Gonzalez Lodge. So this is from our Mason, Mason, Masons, Freemasons. So daghang salamat. Of course, our heroes were also members of the Mason, like Andres Bonifacio, Jose Rizal, and others. So Florencio Gonzalez. So your lodge is named Florencio Gonzalez. I remember that you used to have your events here, meetings here at Palmgrass, and we had a discussion actually about the heroes of Cebu. And Florencio Gonzalez is one of the heroes of Cebu who joined the revolution in 1898. He came from Surigao and studied at the Seminario Mayor, Seminario Colegio del San Carlos, like most of our heroes, like majority of our leaders of our 1898 Cebu Revolution studied in the Seminario Colegio de San Carlos, and also most of the Chinese mestizos studied in the Seminario. And our resource person would be talking about that. So we also would like you to know that we have events like almost twice a month. We we have exciting time travel to our past, to know our roots, and also for us to be proud of our identity as Cebuanos, and to be proud of our ancestors, and to be proud of our warriors and heroes in history, to inspire us in nation building, in our journey towards a better future for everyone. We take inspiration from our past, from our heroes and our ancestors. So this February 14, we invite you once again to a once again exciting and delightful discussion. Last year we discussed about 𝗕𝗵𝗂𝗶, courtship, and sex practices in pre-colonial Visayas. A year before that, we discussed about iyot, the power of women in bed and politics 500 years ago. Of course, iyot is the oldest word for sex. Are you laughing? It's not funny. so this February 14, our topic is iyot o gubat, restrictions of physical intimacies in the Spanish period, which triggered the revolts. And one of our panelists is our resource person is historian Dr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, the Vice President for Academic Affairs of Silliman University, who will be with us again on site on that day. It's very exciting to know Visayans would fight for sex. If you prohibit sex, if you restrict sex, Visayans would revolt. So I don't know with the Chinese mestizos, so we would know about that also. So, right now, and also on February 28th, because our restaurant named in honor of a character in a folklore in Cebu, it's named in honor of Lumaya. It opened actually ahead of Palmgrass because Palmgrass just had its soft opening in 2016. And on February 28, 2016, Kapihan ni Lumaya opened. So please celebrate with us another lami nga event on February 28 for the ikapitong tuig sa Kapihan ni Lumaya. So So, thank you to professor from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, a history professor, Ruben Asuncion, also a Cebuano by at heart, even if he is already in Luzon. He is also he also studied he in his elementary years, and I think high school, he was in Cebu. So he was also one of our panelists before. So Professor Ruben Jeffrey Asuncion of University of the Philippines, Los Baños, thank you for joining us. So Ellen also on site and online, daghang salamat for joining us in this very exciting event, knowing about the history of the Chinese influence or the Chinese and the Chinese mestizos in the Chinese in pre-colonial times, and also during the colonial period, and also the world of the Chinese mestizos today, the stories, the heartbreaks, the loves, and the struggles and the joys of the Chinese mestizos. So, so Karon, we would now introduce our resource person. So, daghang salamat, JB, Gabs, also watching from Lapu-Lapu. It's an honor watching you. I'm here in Lapu-Lapu City. JB, daghang salamat for joining. So, our resource person, one of our resource persons this afternoon, is the Associate Director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he is a teaching faculty in the Department of History. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in Cebu City and lived and worked in Cebu for more than 6 years, with regular visits to Cebu over the past 50 years. And he studied about Cebu history for more than 50 years. And I would always say that he knows more about Cebu than most of us, and he's more Cebuano than most of us. He is a recipient of the Grand Goodman Prize in the Philippine Historical Studies, and he was awarded by the Philippine Studies Committee of the Association for Asian Studies, and he's also um, he was also declared by the Cebu City Council in 2015 as the adopted son of Cebu City. Please help me welcome our Suki resource person, more Cebuano than most of us, and he said he is Cebuano, and he's proud to admit. Please help me welcome Dr. Michael Collinane.
Thanks. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to be here. I apologize in advance. It's because it's so cold here in Wisconsin. I've got a throat issue, but I will scream out as best I can. And I want to thank you so much for inviting me for this event and for promoting the book, which just came out from the University of San Carlos Publishing House.
Daghang salamat, Dr. Mike. So, so Dr. Mike is the author of this book that is we would be discussing. This is The Chinese Mestizos of Cebu City. Please reserve your copies because it's still the print the additional copies would be coming. Please reserve your copies. 400 pages of this book would be discussed. We would be asking Dr. Mike 5 questions or so, and then we would already know almost all the chapters of this book, The Chinese Mestizos of Cebu City, from 1750 to 1900s. And also, of course, Dr. Mike is also the author of this monograph, The Parian of Cebu City, from an overview, a historical overview from 1565 to 1898. This is now available at Pangras, Basahanan, and Bookshop. And also, so many books here at my side there's so many books that are with me right now beside me are his books. Also, very precious books on Cebu and Philippine history. So, daghang salamat for the adopted son of Cebu City, Dr. Mike Collinane, for this. So, our Next panelist, we are also very excited to have her with us for the first time. She is when we refer to her, all my friends at the University of the Philippines and from the media always refer to her as not just she, but the. she is, she is, she is a volunteer of so many organizations. Like she is the president of the 𝗕𝗏𝗃 Foundation. It is an electoral and good government. It is an organization for good government, a watchdog for an electoral watchdog, and also she is the president of the USC ROTC Diehards organization. She was the founding officer and past president of the Women in Literary Arts. She was the Central Visayas coordinator for the National Committee on Literary Arts of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts (NCCA) from year 2000 to year 2007, and of a she is a director of the Cebu Chinese Museum Foundation Incorporated. She was formerly the executive editor of the lifestyle page of the Freeman newspaper and the vice chair of the Cebu News Co-op. Please help me welcome the beauty and brains Chinese mestiza, Miss Marlinda 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏.
Ni man hao. Hello, everyone. Sinian Kuala. Sini Kuala. Happy New Year. The year of the water rabbit. So on with our show for this afternoon. I'm sure you have a lot of questions from us. And Dr. Mike has to go early. So please, Agrippina.
Daghang salamat, Share, Miss Mayen. Daghang salamat for really joining us on site this afternoon. So, of course, we have also our reactors. So, they are coming in a while. We have the Chinese and Cebu Heritage Advocate, Chinese, Ben Chua, not sure if he's coming, but we will have on site also digital media and print journalist, a Chinese mestizo, Gavin Sanson Bagares. So stay tuned for their reactions, and we would also invite you to react also on those who are on site, and you can have you have a time for you to react, and you can also, as we go along, you can also give your questions, especially to Dr. Mike Collinane and to Miss Mayen, as we would be entertaining your questions if you are putting it at the comment section of our Facebook Live event. So now of course, in Cebu, the Chinese and the Chinese business people are so dominant right now even in business. So we would now like to know the history in pre-colonial times. So we would now like to ask Dr. Mike Collinane. So we would like to ask him, because he studied his books, like for example, even the monograph on Parians discuss about 1565 Parian. But we would also like to ask him the background, for him to tell us about what was to tell us about the Chinese contact with our archipelago, or in Cebu, or in what is now the Philippines, before the coming of the Spaniards.
This is, of course, a very important question. It's not my main area of research, but I'm very pleased to make some speculation. First of all, I think it's very clear that the Chinese from China were working their way into trade in the Philippines long before the Spanish came. They were widely known as people who brought with them porcelains and traded with the Filipinos. The other part of the story that has been told by many other people, not myself, but by others, is that Filipinos also were able to go to China. So there was a communication before the Spanish came between the archipelago, which was of course not then known as the Philippines, but the people who lived here had interaction with the Chinese, and a lot of this is recorded in some of the chronicles of Chinese dynasties, where mention of their trade with the islands that are proposed to be the Philippines is mentioned. There are many porcelains and other kinds of artifacts and trade goods that are inspired by the Chinese that are found here, and therefore by the time the Spanish came and noticed what was going on in the Cebu general area, they were already aware that this was an area that was attractive to the Chinese who were coming there. And of course, the Spanish then had to get control over that. And that's where I become more interested in it, in the story, is what happened after the Chinese began to arrive and the Spanish began to maintain control over the archipelago, and how that played out. But I think if you look at archaeologists and linguists and people like this who have looked at language influence and the trade influence and archaeological research and monographs that have been written by Chinese dynastic chroniclers, you'll find a lot of information about some of this early contact before the Spanish came.
Daghang salamat, Dr. Mike. So we would also like to thank our artist, the 𝗕𝗵𝗵𝗲𝗀, for that uh, illustration of 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏 or pakig. It's 𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏. Panag, yes, it's that painting is now, it's now displayed at the ikapitong andana of Pamgas de Cebu Heritage Hotel. The andana named in honor of Lapu-Lapu. And in that floor also is the Royal Suite Room, Lawak Raha, named in honor of Raha Humabon. So that painting, or that painting, acrylic painting, depicts Raha Humabon in a trade with the Chinese. So, so daghang salamat, Dr. Mike. So as Dr. Mike said, even before the Spaniards came, the Chinese came here, and of course it is written in Pigafetta that the Chinese were trading with the Cebuanos. But even before the Spaniards came here, the Cebuanos, the Visayans, were able to reach China because they were raiding China. They were looking for iron. So even that very beautiful princess in Bohol, when she was asking her suitor things, she was demanding things. She asked him, that's Dato Sumanga of Leyte. She asked Dato Sumanga to go to China and bring her a Chinese slave. So, so that's how fast the warships of Visayans were at that time. So, of course, there was already trade with the Chinese. You mentioned to also, Dr. Mike, about the archaeological evidences about that.
Yes, there's a lot of archaeological evidence. It of course extends even after the Spanish come. So, but it is before the Spanish came as well. So that if you archaeologists, even people in their houses maintain porcelain bowls and porcelain jars and things that came from this early trade.
Yes. So, Dr. Mike, now we would now go to the Spanish period.
Yay.
So, so it's just a quick time travel from pre-colonial times. Now we're going to the Spanish period. Our time machine is going so fast. In just a few seconds, we are now in the Spanish colonial period. And please describe how the Spanish colonialists regarded the Chinese in its Asian colony in what is now known as the Philippines, or specifically in Cebu.
This of course is where you get into a more historical of events that can be tracked and looked at more carefully. I think the relationship between the Spanish colonial rulers and the Chinese was a bit of a love-hate relationship. And I think one of the most interesting things to me, which becomes out so strongly in the later periods, is one of the things that made the Chinese so essential in the Philippines was their ability to provision urban areas, to find ways to bring products that were necessary for people to eat and people to use for their housing, and move it from one place to another and make it available. I think the provisioning aspect and the kind of trade aspect that we've always associated with the Chinese is actually a very important part of the why, and the reason why I think the Spanish were needed the Chinese in this colony. There were, as you know, not very many Spaniards, right? And the native communities were doing different things. So the Chinese come in at a particular. The other area that I think is often left out of this, because we often see Chinese as merchants and traders and inter-island shippers and provisioners for urban areas. But the other role that the Chinese played, which was because they were craftsmen. They brought a lot of skills with them from China, particularly in the areas of artistic work and stonework and in architecture and things like this. So you find a very strong way. People who study old Philippine churches now are increasingly understanding that a lot of the work on them was done not only by natives, of course, but also by Chinese, and that they played a very role in this thing as well. So I think one of the things how did the Spanish actually treat the Chinese is interesting, and this is part of why I'm so interested in the Chinese mestizos, is because they fall into this same category. The Spanish treated the Chinese as aliens, right? And therefore they were never considered by the Spanish colonial government to be residents, official residents, or what we might call later citizens of the archipelago. They were denied that, with a few exceptions, and the exceptions are huge, because the most important thing to many of the Spaniards was conversion to Catholicism, conversion to Christianity. And they made lots of efforts, the Spanish, to convert Chinese to the Christian faith. When they did so, the Chinese moved from being what the Spanish called chinos infieles, non-Christian Chinese, to chinos cristianos. And chinos cristianos had a special place for the Spaniards. They were Christians, and they needed to be treated as Christians, and therefore they were treated differently and could move around more freely throughout the society. Then, of course, the next thing that happens is Chinese Christians and non-Christians have relationships with, and this gets you back to your favorite 𝗖𝗏 word that begins to change everything, and you begin to get a relationship between mostly male Chinese coming from China with local native women, and the beginning of the production of Chinese mestizos. For the Spaniards, of course, Chinese mestizos were also like chinos cristianos, Chinese Christians. They were special. They were Catholics, and they also were born in the archipelago. Therefore, they had a claim to the land, a claim to stay here. And this becomes very important later when the Chinese begin to expel Chinese and move them out of the Philippines. They choose not to expel chinos cristianos and mestizo sangle, or Chinese mestizos is what the Spanish called them. So this creates a very interesting thing. But for the most part, the Chinese who did not become Christians were continually considered to be aliens and not a true part of the Spanish archipelago.
So, daghang salamat, Dr. Mike. May problem ako audio. So, daghang salamat, Dr. Mike. So, now my next question is actually about how the Chinese and Chinese mestizos were able to build a community in Parian. But I would like to follow up also regarding your discussion about how the Spaniards treated the Chinese, those who were Christianized and those who were not. And when was this time that the Chinese were expelled from Cebu or from the archipelago?
It comes quite a bit later. So, and I think one of your other questions will get to that pretty clearly.
Yes.
But in terms of the way in which the Spanish treated Chinese, they wanted to keep them in the urban settled areas for the most part. And within those settled areas, they wanted to keep them within certain districts, what we still call ghettos, or districts within an urban area, which became known all over the Philippines as parian.
Yes.
And therefore they created a series. The famous one, of course, is the Parian of Manila, but there was a Parian in Iloilo, there was a Parian in Cebu, and wherever there were large numbers of Chinese who came into any kind of an urbanized area, the Spanish tendency was to have them all be exclusively live and reside in a particular part of the district. In Cebu, this became, for me, very important because it starts very early. I mean, once the Spanish get going in the 1570s and the 1580s, it's really in the early part of the 17th century, 1614. In 1614, the Bishop of Cebu creates a Parian parish in a district where the Parian is today in Cebu City. And that district was separated from the city by a waterway, by what we today call the estero, but what was then called a riachuelo, a small river that separated the what they called the Spanish quarter on the fort side of the river, and on the other side of the river was the Parian. The question that remained, and what gets you to the point of why there was an expulsion of the Chinese and later a feud with the Chinese Mestizos, is over how far does the Parian go when you cross over the estero? Does it go all the way to the mountains? And this becomes a feud between the Parian residents and so on. But in 1614, I think this is a critical moment because the Spanish in Cebu move the Chinese, their children, if they had any at that time, from native women, and a group of natives also that became known as Lutao, and people who lived in a Parian Lutao district where they were supposed to live, and that was an area where the Spanish wanted them to stay. And in 1614, the bishop turns that into a hugely important thing, a parish. It becomes a parroquia. It becomes a place where they're converting Chinese to Christianity, where they have the Chinese who are in that area have Spanish priests who are there, but they also can begin to create their own priests. They can also begin to have their own parish. And that's really important in this story as we move forward. And if you want now, we can talk, if you wish now, to talk about the expulsion, because that's a complicated
Before that,
yeah.
maybe you talk more about why is it that the Spaniards really wanted the Chinese to be just in a specific district.
Most of the colonial powers in Southeast Asia did the same thing. They wanted to keep the Chinese. The Chinese were a unique sort of basically provisioning, trading community that they wanted to keep control on. The Chinese also had access to China, so they were fearful of any kind of limahong, and earlier threats by Chinese were things that the Spanish worried about. So they wanted to keep control of them, keep them under their eye in the urban areas and all together in one place, so that they also, there's many other things that went on. The Spanish also taxed the Chinese, and they taxed the Chinese at a much higher rate than they taxed the native population. And this was another thing. These Parian districts also, in each case, not only were they just places where Chinese lived, but they were the marketplaces for the urban area. It's where shops developed. So, I mean, and Reactors Mojares has written about the history of Colón. Right? In the old days, Colón used to be called Calle de Parian. It was the street that ran across the estero on the 𝗵𝗿 side, where if you needed anything and you were marketing for things, that's where you went. And that was the key commercial district until after, and by the 1860s, the commercial district changed. But during that earlier period, that was the major commercial district. It's where the shops were, and it was waited. So the Spanish had a vested interest in keeping control over Chinese, and controlling their numbers, controlling where they would live, controlling the tax against them, and controlling their movements. And of course, as you know, if you read the history of Chinese in the Philippines, there were many riots that took place, and many times the Chinese communities were attacked viciously, and many of them were killed.
Yes. And regarding 𝗵𝗿, I also read a few paragraphs from your monograph, not really the whole thing yet. So you mentioned about the glory days, like it was the wealthiest district. Like you mentioned about, you described, there was this writer who wrote about the old 𝗵𝗿. And then may you describe to us regarding this, the pinnacle of the glory of 𝗵𝗿. How glorious was it
Yeah,
for
I
the
think we can put a lot of it in perspective, and then therefore we have to tell the story of the expulsion. Is that
Yes.
at no point before the 1850s were there really what we would call large numbers of Chinese in Cebu. The numbers, like when the Spanish, after the British invasion of the Philippines in 1762 to 1764, the Spanish, one of the things that the Chinese of Manila did was they allied with the British against the Spanish, among other things. That led the Spaniards, after they retook the city, to expel the Chinese. The Spanish had wanted to expel Chinese on and off for many times, but this was a more serious effort to do so. And in Cebu, the effect came in 1771 to 1773. So when we look at that moment, when you're going to expel the Chinese, but they argue about it. Like, we're going to expel all the chinos infieles, the non-Christian Chinese, but we cannot expel Christians. They live here. And we cannot expel the Chinese mestizos. They are natives. They are naturales. They were born here, and they're also Christians. So it's interesting that at that time, 1771 to 73, you're trying to figure out how many Chinese were actually expelled. And so living in Cebu at that time, the estimates are just maybe 50, 51 Chinese. That's 51. Later, by the late 19th century, there will be 2,000 Chinese in Cebu. So when the Spanish kick the Chinese out, they leave behind a very small number, I think anywhere from 8 to 10 Chinos Cristianos who stay behind, and about 2,000 Chinese mestizos who'd already grown up in this community up to this point. So that's the beginning of the glory years that I'm trying to describe in the book. From the late 18th century to the 1840s, and to the end of the 1840s, the Chinese mestizos are the wealthiest, most active, most prominent citizens of Cebu City, and they begin a whole series of activities. They become major merchants. The economy is growing during this period. There's a lot of trade with Manila. The city is growing. There's a need for more provisioning of the city. They are owning boats. They are moving products. They are doing all sorts of things. And what we often don't see is that they're also becoming educated. They're also taking roles in the Spanish colonial bureaucracy because there's very few Spaniards who are in the country, and they're also entering the priesthood. So that we begin to see a very large numbers of these Chinese mestizos becoming priests during this period and beginning to play a very, very important role in the Diocese of Cebu at this time. And for me, one of the most interesting people, which I could find more about one person, this would be the person I would want to find. And this is Pedro de San Rafael y Vasquez. He was born in the 𝗵𝗿 Chinese mestizo became an ordained priest at the University of Santo Tomas in the late 1870s, and then he became the longtime parish priest of the Parian. So the Parian had a priest from its own community. And he was probably the richest and one of the most powerful people in Cebu at that time. And the bishop of Cebu, who wants to attack him, waits until he dies in 1829. So Father Pedro was quite a character, and he was presiding over the kind of period of time from the late 18th century to the early part of the 1820s and 1830s, when Cebu Chinese mestizos were by far the most prominent people in the urban area, much more prominent than the Spaniards.
Yes. So we already have questions. Our next question for you is regarding describe how the Chinese mestizos dominated the economic life of Cebu from the late 1700s to the mid 1800s.
Yeah,
So
and this is a new question then.
yes, but there is another question from our audience. Maybe you would like to answer this first before you describe the 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 business activities of the Chinese mestizos. So there is from the National Quincentennial, from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines National Quincentennial Committee page, we have Maria Rodora Agustin, who is commenting, although maybe this is not yet a question. Chinese were discriminated so much by the Spaniards. Chinese were paying higher amount of taxes than the Indios because the Spaniards were threatened with the trading ability and the skills of the Chinese. Best cooks, bakers, farmers, plumbers, sculptors. Mahuhusay ang mga Chino, the reason why they were discriminated and placed into the Parian. So of course, Maria Rodora may be from Luzon because she is. She says, Rodora, are you from Luzon? My ancestors were Chinese mestizos, according to them. They needed to settle in Quezon, that's Quezon province, so she's from Luzon, because of such discriminations. So also, there are questions already also from the Palmgrass page, but I guess you may be able to answer this as you describe the business activities, how they dominated the economic life of Cebu from the late 1700s and the mid 1800s.
Yeah, so first of all, I would agree with most of the statements that you said, and I should also emphasize that this book is not about Chinese. I'm not writing a book about the Chinese. I'm writing a book about Chinese mestizos. The argument is that this is a group of people who, during the period of the expulsion that comes from the late 18th century all the way up until the 1830s and 40s, that if you look at all the major Spaniards, the shift is away from being worried about Chinese and being worried about Chinese mestizos and their influence over natives. So I would agree that the Chinese were treated very badly, and that's what I actually said before. The thing is that it was a love-hate. Like the Spanish urban areas could not survive. So what we always see is that the Chinese shopkeepers, the Chinese provisioners, and I use the word provisioner, and I think what that means is a city doesn't produce its own food. So one of the major roles of Chinese and Chinese mestizos during the Spanish period, and you could argue right on up to the present in many ways, is the provisioning of urban areas, the bringing food and material that is necessary in the city from the countryside to the city. So that requires transportation mechanism. It requires connections with local producers. It requires shipping. It requires transportation. It requires shops and warehouses and bodegas where you keep the material and then you sell it out and distribute it in various ways. This was an essential thing to the rise of the urban areas, of all of the urban areas of Cebu. was how do they function as places? How do they function as economic places? And the Chinese mestizos after the 1880s became very important in doing that. So if you look at that's what I do. You look at the Chinese mestizo families. What do they do? Right? They own boats. They own bergantine golitas. They own goletas. They own sailing vessels. They move across the Visayan Sea. They move all over the place. Right? They bring things back. And the other thing they can do is not only bring things back for that would become provisioning for the urban area, but by the time you get to the 1820s, the 1830s, the 1840s, the Philippines is producing abaca, and you just saw the picture of abaca, and there's a major trade in abaca. A lot of the shipping and the people who are bringing this product, the actual raw material, to a manufactured area that we see up here, are Chinese and Chinese mestizo merchants. We get the start of sugar. All right, sugar begins to come in, and once it comes in, who's growing the sugar in the countryside? Who's bringing the sugar from the countryside to the marketplace and to the trade areas to sell it to the British merchants? And all of these, and therefore we come to our term that is always used for the Chinese middleman, the Chinese middle merchant who comes in and makes this possible. And I think this is, and then you have the shopkeepers. One of the interesting things about the Parian and Calle Colon is the fact that many of the, as we know in the 19th century at least, that the Chinese mestizos lived in very elaborate houses that were constructed. If you look at the 1842 map of Cebu in the book that I just published, you'll see that the Parian was an incredible place compared to the rest of the city. Large or stone houses, the upstairs where the family lived, the downstairs where they had their store, their market, their shop. And therefore this was the major place where people would come to bargain and to buy things that they needed to provision their everyday life. And I think this is the role that the Chinese mestizos played. As an agricultural economy develops, the Chinese mestizos move to the countryside, acquire land, turn a lot of the people on the land into tenants and peasants and working for them, and they produce massive quantities of goods that they sell to the world market. And the British company Smith Bell was very handy in being able to work with Chinese mestizo landowners and Chinese mestizo merchants of various kinds. Their business profited from their relationship with Chinese mestizos, especially in Cebu.
Yes. Daghang salamat, Dr. Mike. So, we have already, I don't know if you can answer this question. There is a question regarding why is it that they are good traders and businessmen? This question is from the DepEd Taguig City and Patero supervisor. Is any success formula or lucky charm? What was their role in the galleon trade?
Oh, the galleon trade. Oh, okay. I think Cebu, if you're looking at Cebu, of course, one of the major problems that Cebu had as a place in the archipelago was that it wasn't involved very much in the galleon trade. Therefore, it was a backwater in terms of the galleon trade. And the galleon trade was a trade that was taking Chinese trade goods from China to Manila, putting them on ships, and the Spaniards giving silver from the New World to the Chinese in exchange for this. And the profit was made by a very small number of people. And it was not a major inter-island process. And Cebu was very little involved in the galleon trade. And it was the question about what makes the Chinese merchants, that's an endless, there's all kinds of literature on this. And I mean, one of the things that people are pointing out more and more, I think, is that the Chinese were aliens. They were people who could collect loans, could collect on debts, could use debts to do things, because in the societies themselves, people were reluctant to begin to do these kinds of things among themselves. So there's a literature that suggests that by the fact that the Chinese are different and they're not natives, gives them an edge up in being able to engage in certain kinds of economic activities. I think if you go to China, you understand that not all the Chinese are merchants. You know,
Yes. So, so now we would now like to give your this is the fourth question, the second from the last question from me, but there are more questions from our online audience, and then we would give you the questions later. So our next question for you is, why and how did the relationship between the Spanish colonialists and the Chinese mestizo merchants deteriorate? And when did this happen?
so when it happened, officially, it happened at the beginning of the 19th century, but the actual attack on the Chinese mestizos did not happen until the end of the 1820s and throughout the decade of the 1830s and the decade of the 1840s. This was a long, long battle, not violent, but bureaucratic. The entire battle that went on for over 20 years took place in the bureaucracies of Manila, where the governor general had to decide. But for me, the issue was I've spent a bit of time on trying to figure out what was going on here. The issue starts between the Chinese mestizos, and I've already made the point that they were very wealthy, they were very prominent, and they were very powerful in the city of Cebu, and they lived in the Parian, which faced out into the hinterland. It faced out to 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, to 𝘃𝗃𝗃, to 𝗏𝗃𝗃, to 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗃, Banilan. These were the lands. This was the hinterland of the city of Cebu. This is where the food was produced. This is where the supplies and all of the things that provisioned the city that the Chinese mestizos had been controlling. And it also began very quickly by the late 1820s and the early 1830s to become sugar land, to become rice land in the areas that were good, all of which made it possible to control these things. So the issue becomes what the Spanish called jurisdicción, and this is the jurisdiction of the Augustinians who controlled San Nicolas, and the Augustinians that's to the south of Cebu, and they controlled the pueblo of Talamban north of Cebu, and those two, if we look at those two municipalities, they began to move around the city, right? And facing that would be the Parian. The Parian already owned, the Parianos, the people of the Parian owned extensive land holdings in these areas of the hinterland of Cebu. And the conflict developed between the Augustinian friars who were reviving their missions in the 1820s and the 1830s, realizing that these wealthy Chinese mestizos were going to control some of the best land in the vicinity of Cebu City for the production of things. So a feud begins. And the feud starts with the Bishop of Cebu, Fray Santos Gomez Marañon, who himself was an Augustinian, and he was the Bishop of Cebu, and he waited. He waited for Pedro San Rafael de Vazquez to die, because that was a man difficult to challenge. So when he died, and here he is, Fray Santos Gomez Marañon. Right? When Father San Rafael y Vazquez died, the Bishop of Cebu, an Augustinian Spaniard, then began a series of legal cases against the Parian. He wanted to suspend the Parian, suppress it as a parish and suppress it as a municipality. And he wanted to have the Spanish colonial rulers extend Talamban over the entire Banilad, Talamban, 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, 𝗏𝗃𝗃, 𝘃𝗃𝗃 area. And so this feud, the Chinese mestizos don't give up easy on this feud. This is a desperate feud. They hire lawyers, they go all the way to Spain, they send people to Manila, they argue this thing, and the case goes on. The case goes on for 20 years. Right? And before it's finally decided by the Governor General. Once it's decided, it's rather disastrous for the 𝗵𝗂𝗏. The 𝗵𝗂𝗏 as a municipality is suppressed. The 𝗵𝗂𝗏 as a parish is suppressed. And in 1849-50, the Augustinians are given jurisdiction over the entire hinterland of Cebu, meaning that the 𝗵𝗂𝗏 is this church that you're now seeing here was then condemned to death. And as everyone knows, it's no longer standing because they ordered it finally by the late 1870s to be absolutely dismantled. So it was dismantled. So this is a huge piece of Cebu City that raged during a period from the 1820s all the way up until the end of the 1840s and into the 1850s. And that church was torn down as a result of this feud. And the 𝗵𝗂𝗏 ceased to be a parish, and it ceased to be a municipality. And the Augustinians took over the entire hinterland of Cebu City under their jurisdiction from Talamban, and today then they moved their capital to Mabolo. So, and Mabolo became the poblacion of the new town of Talamban in 1850. So it's a nice, long, bloody story.
Daghang salamat, Dr. Mike. So there is there is an article here which was also published in your article Time Before Time, and this is in the Integration and Internation. There is this conflict between the Augustinians and also I guess with that it was some Chinese, was it a Chinese mestizo of Parian that had a conflict with the people in the south, like in San Fernando, and they rose up with the Juan Diong leading them. And then, so please tell us a bit about that. That there was a conflict between the people led by Juan Diong.
So
Yes.
one must remember at the time, the beginning of the 19th century, that the most powerful religious order in Cebu were the Augustinians. And they controlled everything on the southeast coast of Cebu from San Nicolas to Santander. So the entire east coast of Cebu was under the Augustinians. Right? But this was rich, as we know, these are areas that have rich agricultural lands. Talisay, Minglanilla, Karkar, Sibonga, Argao. These are all areas that are very rich in agriculture as the agricultural system begins to grow at this time. So who are the entrepreneurs of agriculture at this time? The Chinese mestizos of 𝗵𝗂𝗏. So the Chinese mestizos of 𝗵𝗂𝗏 are interested in moving into this agricultural land, beginning to produce things, agricultural goods that can not only provision Cebu City, but also be traded to other towns and other parts of the archipelago through their shipping interests. The Augustinians, however, do not want any Chinese mestizos to mess with their jurisdiction in the south. So a feud developed. This is the beginning of the feud that ultimately is resolved in 1849. And this is one of the first parts of it. This is where you actually get to see that the feud existed. So what happens is two Chinese mestizos get a contract from the Spanish governor to go down and raise cattle, goats, and sheep down basically down in what would be Naga and San Fernando. And the Augustinians organize against this. And that's why the whole question is, was Juan Diong working for himself, or was Juan Diong in cahoots with the Augustinians? And I prefer to believe the latter because of what I've read about this feud. So Juan Diong takes in a large group of people and walks from Tinaan all the way up to the Cebu City to attack the Chinese mestizos. And of course, he encounters the people at the fort. There's a little fight. Not very many people are hurt. They turn around, they go back to Tinan, and they take a cannon. Then there's a series of negotiations. Nobody wants to shoot anyone, and nobody wants to send an army down. So they do send an army down, but it doesn't do anything. But in the end of this process, the Augustinians are arguing that the Chinese mestizos should not be allowed to open up these lands, that this land is owned by the local people, and these people are a part of our parish, the Augustinian parishes of Naga, which at this time, San Fernando hadn't become a parish yet. It was still a part of Naga and Karkar. So that was the beginning of a long number of years of conflict between the order of San Agustin in Cebu and the Chinese mestizos of Parian that is finally resolved in 1849 when the Parian is suspended and crushed and
Yes.
totally suppressed.
So, Dr. Mike, there is a connected to the Parian. There is a question from Vivaris Direct. Uh, he is I guess, a history and heritage advocate, and he wants to ask you if you know about, if you have an information about Barrio Licor,
Oh, yeah.
now Dayas, adjacent to the Parian,
Yeah.
adjacent to the Parian. Was the purpose of it, or the role of now Dayas, the same as Lutao, as a Chinese settlement extension?
This is of course a part of what is the Parian. Is that when the Spanish created it in the beginning in 1614 with a very small number of people that included a few Chinese mestizos and a few Cebuanos who lived outside the urban area of the Spanish quarter. That district became known as Parian. But once they started to the Chinese and the Chinese mestizos started to develop the district, they began to expand out towards Likud, towards Dayas, towards where we now in these areas, that as they're moving out into more areas to build their houses. I think if you look at the 1842 map of Cebu City, it's rather remarkable because the actual church of the Parian was located in Likod, and so Likod is literally Likod sa Parian. It's the Parian was originally the district that was closer to what we would today see as Colon, to the Estero, and the row of houses were along there. But as they expanded, as they became more wealthy, they had a restricted area in which they had to expand their residences. So they began to move out in that direction towards these areas that are now kind of thing. And this was the feud. This is exactly what the feud was. As the Parianons are beginning to move out into this hinterland that is partly agricultural until you urbanize it, which has been happening in Cebu ever since this time in rather remarkable ways. Because Cogon, where the provincial capital, and most of what would be used to be called Jones Avenue, that was agricultural area. That was agriculture, and it fed the city from there and from all sorts of things. So Licod, Dayas, these areas were the areas that the Parian expanded into as it became larger and more productive. And then they began to move out and own land in the other areas, and to have mga sao in these other areas. They had tenants as well.
Yes. So actually, we have one more question for you, regarding the participation of the Chinese mestizos, even Chinese, like in the Gremio de Chino, with the 1898 revolution, Cebu Revolution against Spain. So we have that last question for you. And I don't know what to do about these so many questions online for you. So maybe we'll choose some questions after you answer this question. So we have um,
Yeah, I mean,
so we would like to ask you. So after you answer this question, we would like to ask you this. Give you the questions from our audience, but maybe just a few.
yeah.
Okay, it's
Okay.
already, what's the time there now, Dr. Mike?
2:30 a.m.
2:30 a.m. So it's in the morning.
2:15 a.m.
Please remove na lang. Kana.
and it's still freezing.
And then he would be riding a bicycle going home. And did you know that uh, Mike's age is already, I won't tell you, it's a secret. He is 40 years old,
Yes, I just reached 40.
times two. so, 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 so please elaborate on the involvement of some Chinese mestizos in the 1898 Cebu Revolution. Of course, we know that the treasurer of war of the Manggugubot sa Sugbo sa 1898 was Lucio Herrera Oichihun, a pure Chinese, married, who married a native. So, sige, Dr. Mike.
Yeah, so we've discussed this before because I wrote a book called Arenas of Conspiracy and Revolution in Cebu, and it's largely an effort to find out who revolted. In other words, in 1898 in Angkagubot, who revolted? And the book, it gets down to very detailed information about the names of people who revolted. I gathered the names from newspapers like Bagong Sog over the teens and 20s and 30s, where Cebuanos argued with each other about who actually fought in the rebellion, who were the leaders of the rebellion. So I spent a lot of time picking them out, and then I decided I had about 100, there were about 300. I reduced it down to about 150, and then I sort of said, who were they? And then I found everything I could find out about who they were. So here's who they were for the most part, generally. They were largely the Principalia of San Nicolas. So that's really an interesting part of the story. And in the Arenas of Conspiracy, there's a whole chapter on why they might be interested in overthrowing Spain. It's a very complicated story. So Candido Padilla, some streets, Jacinto Pacaña, Francisco Llamas, Ferraris, and a whole series of others of these Chinese, of the natives actually of San Nicolas, were a key group in Angkagubot. Right? Then if you move to the city and you say, who in the city? Because at that point, San Nicolas did not want to be in the city, and they were trying to stay as a pueblo, as a parish. But in the city, one of the things that becomes very clear, because many of the San Nicolas known were the same, is that they worked for the colonial government. They were what I named as empleados. They were employees of the Spanish government. They were escribientes. They were clerks. Right? And so if you look at the majority of the people who fought in the Kagubud and became the Manggugubot, they were members of the Principalia of San Nicolas and their relatives and friends. It was the family and friends of a handful of maybe 50 to 60 to 100 Filipinos who worked in Cebu City for the colonial government. So they were people who were very close to the colonial government, and they're the people who chose to rebel. So where were the mestizos in this? So Cebu City had two gremios, a Gremio de Naturales, which was essentially everyone in the city who was not a Chinese mestizo, and the Gremio de Mestizo Sangle, the Chinese mestizo gremio. So if you look at those two gremios and you try to see where did most of the Manggugubot come from, they came from the Gremio de Naturales. They did not come from the Gremio de Mestizos. So if we look at Lucio Herrera and we say, wow, that's really interesting that there would be a Chinese who would be involved in the but then we realized that he married Francisco Llamas's daughter, and he lived in San Nicolas for a while and was very closely, both in business and in friendships and in family relations, with many of the San Nicolasnon that were involved in the revolt. So that could explain him. But if you look at the Gremio de Mestizos Sangle, you find one of the most active characters who ends up getting involved in 𝗏𝗃𝗃 is Marcial Vélez, from the very prominent Chinese Mestizo Vélez family, right? And it's a long story too, but he was one of the key players. Another aspect of the Chinese Mestizos, because of their wealth, because of their position in the community, many of them were not bureaucrats. Many of them were not clerks. They were landowners. They were propietario. They owned city property. They held offices, honorary offices in Cebu's ayuntamiento, which would be the equivalent of city council. So they worked closely with the Spaniards. They were friends with the governor. They were friends with the bishop. So quite likely, we don't find a lot of Chinese mestizos involved in 𝗏𝗃𝗃, but we do find some key players, and they are very interesting when you look at why they got involved.
So to know more about that, you should read the arenas of conspiracy and rebellion in the late 19th century Philippines. So there are bio sketches here of almost 300 leaders of the 1898 Cebu Revolution, and we chose a few from these leaders as the names of the floors at Palmgrass, and we used the bio sketch of Dr. Mike Collinane to describe those heroes, in which floor we put their names. So when Dr. Mike will come, Dr. Mike already came here, and then I told him that we got that description on the wallpaper from your book, from your bio sketch, but we shortened it and we translated it into Cebuano, the Bisaya. So anyway, Dr. Mike is coming soon in summer. So maybe we would have another conversation on site with Dr. Mike. So there are many questions for you, Dr. Mike. So we would choose only two. Okay, it's nearly 3 a.m. there. So there is just this comment, but this is not a question maybe, from 𝗕𝗵𝗂𝗃𝗃. It's a very long comment. Before the Chinese were converted into Christians, there were two types of Chinese. There were Buddhists and there were Taoists. And but lots of people said that the Taoists are more popular than the Buddhists, and that because the Taoists have this kind of mystical powers that helps them in their day-to-day lives, and also helps them in their dealing business with any kind of people here in Cebu. They have lots of gods. So it's a comment to those online. Check 𝗕𝗵𝗂𝗃𝗃's comment at the Facebook Live event. Then Kabino, please remove. Kabino is here, and Cabino Guerrero, one of those you mentioned in the introduction of your book. Cabino, you are here. You are mentioned here in this book. Also, our reactor, Sanson Bagares, is already here. They are mentioned at the same time here in one sentence. Cabino and Gavin. And Cabino is asking exactly when the Parian River, or the Parian ceased. Parian River. It's asking you about Parian River ceased to be navigable. Kanas ako no na uga ang Parian og di na maagian og bangka.
Yeah, I know that's a question that it's because we walked up and down the estero quite a bit together with Gabino, we've done this together. So I think that the indication that it was closed by the 40s and 50s is very clear, because it's at that time that the commercial district of Cebu City moves to Lutaos. It moves to the area to south of the city, south of the Santo Nino. And that whole coastline gets extended and down. So that when you see the new commercial district that arises in Cebu in the 1850s, in the 1860s, and then after that, until it moves to the new port area where it is now, it's on the south side of the city. And so my assumption has been that it had been the Parian Estero, or the Río and the Rio de Parian that Bino is calling it, was silting up already by the 1830s and the 1840s. And it was difficult to come in from Tinago in that area, because that's where you entered. You'd enter it in Tinago and sail your ship up to what would be 𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃, and it would allow you to have an internal waterway that was safe to unload your shipping. That silted up by the 1830s and 40s, forcing navigation and everything to move to the other side of the city. And therefore that quickly becomes a commercial district. And of course, we want to realize, as soon as it becomes a commercial district, the Chinese mestizos start buying property there. So it shifts, and many, like the 𝗠𝗵𝗂𝗃𝗃 family owns a lot of property there. Other Veloso families owned property there. So many of the wealthy Chinese mestizo families immediately moved to acquire property for their warehouses in that district. And then, of course, when the Chinese start coming into Cebu in the 1840s and 1850s in larger numbers, that they go there, not to the Parian. That they move into the commercial district rather than into the old Parian.
Okay. So that's the answer to your question. It's another history of Parian River. So,
I love.
So we would like to entertain one question from the on-site audience. Does anyone want to have a question? Want to give the question? There was a question also here online, but it got buried in the comments. There was a question: what was the relationship between the Chinese mestizos and the Indios at that time?
During what period of time?
The Spanish period.
Okay, yeah. So good and bad. It's like, it's always that way. I mean, is for me, the relationships, if you're Chinese mestizos, suggest that there was a relationship between Chinese and native women, then it's pretty obvious that happened in very large numbers, because we have the production of lots of Chinese mestizos. If you're talking about feuds among people, that's also common. I mean, feuds over trade, feuds over debt, feuds over loans. These things happen all the time because merchants collect loans. They loan money, and there's usually a debt attached to it. So that creates animosity, and it creates all kinds of tension. So there's not much we can do about that. But part of the argument of my book is that by the time you reach 1900, that these Chinese mestizos you can also say, what's always interesting to me was when I first got to Cebu and you say someone, oh, he's very mestizo. And when you say he's very mestizo back in the old days, he kind of looked more Spanish. Is it? And in fact, that was not the case. The Chinese mestizos way outnumbered the Spanish mestizos, but they have a different look. I mean, everyone would know they have a different look than the Spanish mestizo. So it's always been interesting to me to watch how the word mestizo is used in as it passes through. And it's interesting that mestizo comes with kind of a sense that this looks better, which is always it was always very funny to me that that should be the way it would be, but it gets used that way. So the question is, do you mean Chinese mestizo or do you mean Spanish mestizo?
Yes. So now we have one last question from the audience. Does anyone want to give a question to Dr. Mike? He's already freezing right now.
Yeah, is Gavin there? Is Gavin there?
Gavin is here. Would you like to see Gavin?
Yeah, I want to see Dino if he's there also.
Please show the audience. Pwede ba show ang audience? So we have here our audience. We have more audience online. We have the tour guides, and we have also Gavin there at the back, who woke up early just for you. And we have from the veterans
Yeah.
and daughters, and also we have our other friends. We have La Liga reenactor, and we have this is I forgot the name, but the last name is Way. Yes,
Where's
from the
Cabino? Cabino, are you there?
Cabino is online. He
Oh,
is
he's online.
in Negros.
Okay.
And we
Oh,
have,
he's
of
in
course, have seen our other panelists, Miss Marlinda and Betty Tan. So, wala na yung question. So, daghang salamat, Dr. Mike, for sharing your precious golden time and cold freezing time with us. And daghang salamat for um, sharing with us your study for 50 years of studying our past, our roots, so that you would know more and be proud of our history as a people. And then, so we are looking forward to seeing you on site a few months from now. Daghang salamat og maayong buntag dinha.
Thank you. Thank you
So,
very much to everyone.
bye. So, daghang salamat to Dr. Michael Linane for giving us time to and sharing with us the contents of these books, the Chinese Mestizos of Cebu City. So he's shared with us 450 pages of his book in those few questions, but of course it's not enough. You have to read the book. He mentioned also about the participation of Marshal Velez, a Chinese mestizo in the revolution, also of Lucio Herrera, whose wife was a sister of Francisco Llamas. And also, of course, he has a book also, The Battle for Cebu. So, we would now go to the very exciting part of our program, our event. So this would be the Chinese, the matters of the heart of the Chinese mestizo. And so we would now like to ask these questions. For our on-site panelists, a Chinese mestiza. And so we would like to ask her, Miss Mayen, regarding her memories being a Chinese mestizo in Cebu.
Hi, good afternoon again, everyone, especially those who are here. I would like to give a little introduction to my sharing to continue from where Dr. Mike left off. The Chinese mestizo of the 1890s, or at the turn of the century, who became proprietarios, or urban property owners, and hacienderos, or provincial landowners, subsumed their Chinese origins by taking on non-Chinese names. And we know that they served in the government and became socio-economic leaders. Therefore, they were no longer considered Chinese, nor did they identify themselves as part of the increasing Chinese migrants or immigrants who came to Cebu in the latter eras. Now, my sharing is in the post-World War II Cebu. Cebuano Mestizo Chinese. I grew up in the late 50s. So I started school in USP, and because we lived in the Lugarta Street area where my uncle also had a house. And I graduated grade 1. I remembered I graduated grade 1 and almost did not get an honor, although I was awarded a medal. Well, thankfully, as a third honor. I was supposed to get the salutatorian medal, but I did not get it because I had a conduct C. Why did I get it? Because I always figured into arguments and quarrels, and eventually what I remembered most was I figured in a boxing bout. Actually, it's more my side. I boxed a very big guy, a bigger boy in my class, because it was always instigated by, remember the usual derogatory, INSIK wakang rhyme. So I boxed him and I ran right away to my yaya, our maid, who was waiting for us at the gate, and went home. And I waited for my dad, and I told my dad, Galo, I still remember the name, Galo boxed me. And my dad said, and my mom was so mad. And my dad said, okay, I'll talk to him tomorrow. Let's settle this. Don't be afraid. It's okay. Go back to school. Because I was always trying to defend my younger sister. There were just two of us, two girls in my family. And my younger sister is a complete different personality than mine. So she would cry. I would not cry. I would fight back. And that was the reality of my childhood as a Chinese mestiza. And so what happened was we were transferred to Sacred Heart School for Girls, where my father said, now you can be at peace because you will be among fellow Chinese like us. And when we transferred, we were considered Filipinas. So that is straddling two cultures. You feel you are Filipino, Chinese, but when you are with Filipinos, they consider you INSIK. When you are with Chinese, you are considered Wana. That was the situation while I was growing up. And there was a confusion of relations, because there were relatives of children from the Juanma, the Filipina wife, and the children of the Chinese wife. And so we had Pakha, my father had Pakha up lotus-footed Chinese ladies. We had the grandmas who were they were called Soy Kim-po. We call them Kim-po from my father's side. And because my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, was the daughter of the Juanma, so she had a half brother from the Chinese wife. And so we had really pure Chinese relatives from my father's side. And I would like to share our 𝗏𝗏𝗃 clan. There were 6 of them. My grandmother had 6 children, 3 men, 3 sons, and 3 daughters. My father was the eldest. And there was always a problem when the men got married to their wives, because as you notice, Osiling, the eldest, married my mom, who was Lisita Roa of Osamis, Filipina. The next son, Captain Timoteo Tim 𝗏𝗏𝗃, married Mami Meng, Carmen Gogo of Opon. And the last son, Benjamin, married Teresita Suson of Cebu. So my grandmother had a fit every time the sons got married to the Filipinas. Now, on the other side, it did not quite, I would like to point out, it did not quite get to that point that it was a very major issue. But when the daughters got married, that is a completely different thing. When my Aunt Salud got married to a pure Chinese Uncle Henry, it's okay. So she was setting an example, pure Chinese. When my Aunt Magdalena had a boyfriend who was pure Filipino, Daddy Pedro Nieri, the auditor of Compañía Marítima, my grandmother said, no, no, no way. And so my father, being the eldest, said, Ma, don't try to repeat a situation when we will have a suicide again in the family. Because the next son from my dad, my dad's next brother, committed suicide while they were in the evacuation place. Because, of course, there was another reason for it, but because he had a relations with a cousin who was also Chinese Mestiza. But the thing was, my grandmother was so strict that she nagged him into that situation. So my father said, don't you dare create another situation when, we will have another problem. And so they got married, and she was one of the happy wives in the clan. And the last, of course, because she was the last, she profited from the whole thing. There was no more no more challenge to hurdle when she got married to a Filipino lawyer, which is 𝗕𝗵𝗂𝗶. What I'm saying is, we had a big family. The sons were able to get away with it when they got married to Filipinos, to Filipino women. But when it's the daughters that would get married to a Filipino man who will go into the family, it was such a big deal. I did not know why at the time. So from that 6, we were 25 grandchildren. So the Angbetic family of 𝗏𝗏𝗃 and Josefina Miranda became a clan of us in different parts of the family. And as I said, we had Juanma, and we had Baka, the lotus-footed aunties of my father. I would remember going to their homes because Papa would always let my mom go to them to learn the language, to at least pick up some terms, and to learn how to cook the authentic Chinese dishes that everybody would love to eat. And so I grew up with authentic Chinese dishes. And one of those, the aunt of my dad. Now this is already hearsay because I was too young to find out whether this was true or not. But one of those aunts, I heard from the adults, committed suicide because one of her daughters got married or eloped with a Filipino, one of the employees. So that is how strongly the parents were against mixed marriages. I mean, especially among the women, among the daughters. I don't know why. Maybe the sons, they could always say, anyway, you don't have to end up marrying the girl. And you will still end up marrying who I want you to marry. But usually that's how I remember during my growing up years. It was a turbulent time, but my most clear remembrance was the taunts, was the sungog, was the way we are looked at by our Filipino playmates, but at the same time when we changed venue and went to the Chinese community, how we were also looked at by our Chinese playmates eventually. The first thing that I learned is you have to learn how to speak Chinese for you to get accepted. And more so, if you look Chinese and you don't know how to speak Chinese. You can get away with it if you look like some of my classmates. I mean, I know some people, some relatives who are dark, who have big eyes, who just don't look like they have a pinch of Chinese blood in them. It's okay if they don't know how to speak Chinese. It's all right. And then the Chinese is Juan na si Chusia, Buyaukin na, Buyaukong, Buyaukin. So, but the thing is, if you really look like one and you don't know how to speak, siapay. So that's one thing. Another thing is you have to know how to learn the Chinese custom. Lanang 𝗕𝗴𝗿. You have to know how to behave properly in a Chinese situation, whether you are Filipino or pure, more especially if you are Chinese mestiza. Yes, Agrippina? Next question.
Daghang salamat, Miss Mayen, for sharing that the story of your childhood, how hard it is to be among the sungugan nga mga
Sugsugan.
classmates, sugsugan nga mga classmates nga Cebuano. So what was why do you think I did not experience that actually, that our like I had classmates also, and of course the family also had more Chinese nga blood, but wala dili na sad mi mo sulti og ininsik. But kanang I did experience that we would tease our classmates who are of Chinese descent, or the Chinese mestiza. So why do you think your classmates, so what came into your mind why your classmates would tease you at that time?
Oh, actually, that's why I took this up now, because this thing is taboo. We don't discuss this. Among those of you who went through the situation that I went through, you don't discuss it. It's just among the smaller ones. Once you get a little bit bigger, 10, 12, maybe, you still have that kind of snide remarks, but these are done behind your back. And these are done among themselves, whether among Filipinos or among the Chinese, but they won't do it to your face anymore. And so that's how it is. And it slowly evolved into a better situation at your time as against my time. I'm talking about the late 50s, 60s, towards 70s is not so much anymore, I guess.
Yes.
But
Because right now, there's already a love song dedicated to the Chinitas.
yes,
Ang classmate ko nga Chinita. So we had one of our panelists 2 years ago, Imping. He was the one who Imping, no? He was the one who composed that song, ang classmate ko nga Chinita.
pero Agrippina, I would
Yes.
like to share. I had a meeting yesterday. I don't know. I will not tell you what meeting was it, but one of our colleagues in the meeting was inebriated, hobog, when he came to the meeting. And you know, when you're hobog, in vino veritas, manggawas ang tinuod. Okay, so he was really inebriated. In fact, towards about 20 minutes into the meeting, he was snoring. Okay, but before that, he was. You get to be quarrelsome, isn't it? When you are hubog, you're into it. So, and then he said, "Why is it that you don't allow us Filipinos to pangulitaw your daughters or your cousins or whatever, inyong mga girls?" Out of the blue. Well, we were not there for a cultural confrontation. That meeting was a serious meeting about about something else. That out of the blue,
The truth came
he
out.
he said it out. Of course, not to me, but then
Yes.
some of our
He must have been heartbroken in the
yes,
past.
I think so.
He wanted to court a Chinita,
And then,
but then Dili pwede.
He was told aside at the side, "Hoy, Miss Mayen is here," and then he stopped. But the thing was, if you think that something like that is no longer happening, it still is. It's just that it is not, it's not anymore out in the open.
Okay. So maybe
Okay.
we would really know more about this after these conversations. So we would now like to ask Miss Mayan regarding when you were growing up, you discussed already about your memories of being a Chinese mestizo, Chinese mestiza. We would like to know more about what comprised your world. So we usually have those who are not in the world of the Chinese and the Chinese mestizo in Cebu. We would always say that the Chinese mestizos are privileged and their world is a world of roses and everything good and heavenly. So please tell us about that.
Well, as I mentioned, it is always a demand on our part for conformity, as what we noticed, what we learned in Dr. Mike's sharing historically, this very scholarly book. The Chinese, as in anywhere that they have settled, they would want to be accepted. And part of the acceptance is to make sure that they are just one of the, they become one of the Pinoys, one of the Pahinantes. If you are a Pahinante, if you are a businessman, you're just one of the. You don't, and and you'll have to know that there was a question about Taoism and Buddhism earlier on. Taoism is not a religion. It's a it's a part of the, what's this, like our animism. Remember, in our animism, in our culture, in Filipino culture, animism, that Taoism is, it's a philosophy. It's more philosophy as what, yeah, way of life, philosophy. Buddhism is a religion, and most Chinese practice Buddhism. My mother-in-law was a Buddhist, a practicing Buddhist. Taoism is when you do your fortune, and the gods are more or less the same gods as the Buddhists have. But the thing is, in Buddhism as a religion, and which most of the Chinese practice, you are told to be humble, to stay low, not to say anything. If you give something, you're not supposed to tell one and all, "Hey, I donated this or that, I did this kind of thing or that." Because according to the Buddhist religion, if you already are given your due in this life, everybody clapped their hands and told you how good you are or how kind you are, and that's it. Your kind deed has been recompensed now. So there's no good thing that will happen to you in your next life. So for them to do good, to be generous, to be kind, is to be done silently, away from eyes. It's what we in Christian, in our Catholic religions would be told, the right hand must not know what the left hand is doing. Okay? So that's it. So that's why wherever they settle, they are very laid back. They are not on the forefront of newspaper and whatever. They will help you. You come to them for assistance, they will help you, and that's it. No statue for them, or no whatever. So that is what happened. And I think when I grew up, I I found out that they are around. I mean, the real pure Chinese families were around, and they were using their names, no longer in a Filipinized way. The Lims and the Gos and the Tans and the Chen and the kings, etc. They were using their names, and we already realized how big they are as families, and they banded themselves into family corporations. That's what we know them now, in order to help each other. And that's why another thing that I realized, aside from 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 the conformity that we're supposed to do, is to really speak the language. Because once they know that you're mestiza, but still you speak the language, they will appreciate you more, and you will have more respect coming from both, especially the Chinese community.
Yes. Daghang salamat. So I would like to follow up that very interesting story of 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 that hubog, the hubog man who was saying something about why wouldn't the Chinese or the Chinese mestizos, why wouldn't they want their daughters to be courted by the Filipinos or the non-Chinese or the non-Chinese mestizo? So did you also experience this? Like being restricted, prohibited from having a boyfriend who is a Cebuano or not, does not have any Chinese blood in him?
Yes, my father was very strict. I'm not saying just strict, but very strict. Aside from the fact that he was Chinese, he was also very palikero. He was a chick boy. So, and he had two daughters. So he made sure that nothing would happen to us, karma wise. Anyway, the first thing that he said is, I have no restriction for you to make friends. You can be friends to everybody, but not to a certain somebody. And then it would be better if you will cultivate your friendship with Chinese boys. He was not restricting me from having friends with Filipinos, but he was saying it would be better if you would develop more friendship with Chinese boys. And tacit to that is the meaning that because eventually you will have to marry somebody who is Chinese, right? And the second rule is no boyfriend. You can have as many friends, but no boyfriend. And so, considering that when I went to college, I went into a lot of organizations. I was with the Christian Left Community, which is a religious organization. It was one group. And then I was with the drama club, the dramatics group became another group, and then I was with a youth organization, and so I had a lot of groups that really were mostly Filipinos. So that became a bit complicated because he would not allow me to be escorted home or being taken out of the house with just one. So I would get escorted out of the house with at least three people, and then I would be brought home with at least three people. So the principle of three plus me. So so that's it. Why? Because I would like to think that the the Chinese would want to make sure that their daughters will be married into somebody who understands the customs of the family of the Chinese mestizo. And if it's a Filipino who will not understand that you have to be respectful, filial devotion to your elders is important. And here comes this Filipino husband. You say, nga namang mag-apil-apil man na sila. And then he's the husband. So it's a bit complicated. But if you get married, if your daughter gets married to a Chinese who understands it, there's no two thing about it. I mean, they would understand. So certain things of the customs will not be problematic if your daughters will get married into Chinese.
So,
That's how I would like to explain it.
okay, but then the question is, he himself, your father himself, got married to a non-Chinese.
And we were witness to that, the problems that it had. Like, they were not in good terms with my grandmother for years. I think they were forgiven when I was already 8 years old, and grudgingly.
So my
And
question regarding your reaction, so were you okay with the restrictions set by your father? How did you react to the restrictions?
sometimes I felt very much hemmed in. And in fact, my confessor, he was a Jesuit, Spanish Jesuit priest, told me, your first and foremost responsibility is to your God. If you feel that God, leads you to this person, and then your father is, trying to be a block to that, then pray over it, and then follow what you think is God's will for you. But then eventually I would like to share that in my fourth year college, I had an open relationship with a Filipino who was a student leader, who was already working when I got to know him. He was from the fraternity, who was like our partner to, to our sorority, and he was one of the alumnus of that fraternity. So uh, he was already working when we got to know each other, and he was Filipino. And I said, no, I cannot have a real, boyfriend girlfriend thing with you, because my father will know. And so we still were open to be with other people, and he with other girls. But then eventually I had to break up, because I was afraid. I mean, I grew up in that situation when I know filial obedience was of utmost importance, and eventually I got married to a pure Chinese.
So sorry
That's
na
what
lang
happened.
si Koan, si non-Chinese boyfriend. So mao na siya, the sad reality that the boyfriend has to be given up because of filial or parental love. Asa may asa mas strong a love? Asa ang mas strong a love? Love for the parents or love for a boy? The stronger love is the love for this pure Chinese. So, Miss Bayan, please tell us about uh, how was life being married to a pure Chinese? There are already so many questions for you. So online, so there is a Polido from the DYRF, a media person. Beautiful stories, Marlinda, and and from Polido, and this question from Bongbong Omega, our tour guide for the Japanese tour guide. Goa ID. Saan naman yung Goa ID? I love you, Nani. A Chinoy can easily marry a Pinay. No, is it easy? So I don't think so. So, but can't a Pinoy marry a Chinita? Is it still happening now? So before you answer that, or maybe you can answer that as you also tell us about, was it really true love that made you marry a pure Chinese, or was it arranged marriage?
It was not really an arranged marriage, because I always, whenever I was asked, how did you meet your husband? I always say, ako na siyang sinuruyan. I had, I, I conducted a seminar for young people. I was the Visayas Mindanao chairperson of 𝗏𝗏𝗿𝗏𝗏𝐴 World Assembly of Youth, and we conducted a seminar for young people in Cagayan de Oro, and he had a construction firm in Cagayan de Oro, and I had to go to the mayor, and the mayor was his good friend, Mayor Ruben Canoy, the late Mayor Ruben Canoy was his good friend. I had to call on the mayor, and so I had to ask around who knew the mayor, and so my auntie knew him, and etc. So we met that way. It's not really an arranged marriage, only that he met the requirements of my father. So my father was the one more excited about me meeting him, because he went to visit me the next weekend. So my father became so excited. So there was really no problem and anymore as far as he was concerned. And so the first thing, if now that you're asking me how it was getting married to a pure Chinese family, the first thing that my mother-in-law, Mama Duang, did was go to the Taoist temple. That our neighbor, because my parents' house is just beside the Taoist temple. So my mother-in-law went up to the Taoist temple to 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 have this kidney stones, and to find out how compatible we will be. And his how do you call this? Zodiac sign is horse. My zodiac sign is tiger. And as far as the Chinese is concerned, that's the most compatible. So they started the the formal, how do you say that? The formal going to the house and talking to the parents and etc. And um, I just would like to share from this at this point that I'm just very thankful that my mother-in-law was the kind of mother-in-law that is so that you would want to have. And I have this book of a collection of my column articles, and this is an article that I wrote for Mother's Day. And I mentioned her, and I would like to share this with you. When I think of a mother's spontaneous warmth and affection to all her children, I think of my late mother-in-law, Mama Duang, as always, as she always regarded me as one of her own daughter. When I delivered my babies, she was there attending to me, feeding me with her personally cooked herbal concoctions. When I was not feeling well, she would come to the house in the evening to give me a good rub and a relieving head massage only she could give. She really would massage you so well. I never had a massage like hers after. She was also there for the laughs and for the good times, even sharing a secret cigarette puff with me. I used to smoke, but I never dared smoke before my father. So I would smoke at the back of the house or wherever I would not be seen. And Mama would go after me and share a puff with me. That's how modern she was. Mama had her failings, but she was first and foremost a mother anyone would wish for. No wonder that all three sisters-in-law are excellent mothers to their families. My son said, "Thank you for being my mom. I love you." Those words were the crowning glory of my existence. So I have written this piece for Mama Dueng, who is no longer around, for all of us, her children and in-laws, whom she treated as her own. She lives as long as we keep her memory alive in our hearts. And I would
Very
like to
beautiful.
share the picture of Mama and Papa.
Yes, the photo. It's a very beautiful tribute to your
Yeah,
mother.
she really treated me like her own.
So my question for this, Miss Marian, is so it's okay for it. They are a pure Chinese family, so it's okay with them that you are a mestiza and not pure Chinese.
Actually, I married into a pure Chinese family, but their attitude or worldview was more open than most, because if they were really strictly Chinese in their requirements, they would not have allowed my husband to live with us. We lived with my parents because my father told my husband, who said, if you want to get married to my daughter, I have only two daughters. you better live with us because the house is big enough for all of us. So it contrary to what should have happened, that I should go over to live with them, he lived with us. So that's one good thing. So my mother was there, my own mother was there to take care of my babies when they were still babies growing up. So that's one. Another is, as what I said, Mama was so open with her, like she knew I was smoking and she would check suggest the smoking. And I would say, Ma, I like to eat. But please don't make me cook. Okay, so she would say, "Xiao gina." So I considered her more like a grandmother than a mother because she was older than my grandmother, and my eldest sister-in-law was older than my mother because there were 7 of them from my husband's family. My husband was the youngest, and my husband is 8 years older than me. So can just imagine the big difference from the eldest sister. And in between the siblings was a 3-year gap because Papa would go home and then Mama would be pregnant, and then she would come back to the Philippines, and after 3 years she would get pregnant. The first sister and the first brother were born in China until they came over and settled in Hilongos. So the thing is, they are more open already. Although Mama was still, she could hardly talk in Cebuano. So when she would talk to me, I was forced to learn how to speak Chinese and to speak it in a straighter way so that she could also understand me.
So which Chinese is it? Which language?
Hokkien. And so I learned a lot from my mother-in-law in terms of the Chinese language than the special classes I attended in Sacred Heart all together. Because she was talkative. She would talk, and I would ask help from my sister-in-law. What did she say? And my sister-in-law would laughingly explain. She said, and that way. And that's how I learned. That's the only way you will learn a language. Listen to it and then say it.
Yes.
If you don't practice it, you lose it, right?
Yes.
So
So there are now more questions for you. So and it's centered on relationships. So you have not yet, you still have to answer the question if a Chinoy can easily marry a Pinay, but a Filipino cannot marry a Chinita. Then this is one question. Can a man, like a Chinese mestizo, marry a Filipina, but a Filipino cannot marry a Chinese mestiza?
It's not cannot, but it's easy. It's more difficult for a Filipino to get married to a Chinese mestiza. That's true. Than for a Chinese to get married, Chinese mestizo to get married to a Filipino.
Yes, I even know like the woman is a doctor. She's a Chinese, and then a friend, and then she married a Filipino, and it took her years to tell her parents that she got married.
Yeah, I think I would like to give a differentiation. When we say Chinese
Mestiza.
family,
Yes.
it's really first generation Chinese parents, like my parents-in-law. They came from China. So, and then there is such a thing as second generation Chinese, meaning if the parents were already born here, and even if pure, but they're already born here, that's another, but still pure Chinese. So there's a difference in the, or if the parents are just like mine, my father was a Chinese, 70%. Papa was 70% Chinese. My grandmother was mestiza. My grandfather, Ang Vitek, was pure Chinese from China. So my father would be about 70% Chinese. But when you looked at him, he didn't look like Chinese. He didn't look Chinese at all, because my grandmother had huge eyes and not so fair complexion. So there are some of them who would not be as fair. So something like that. So there's a difference from the kind of Filipino Chinese family that we're talking about.
Yes. So there is now this question also from, there is a question for Cabino, but I guess you would be able to answer this later. And there is a question from 𝗕𝗵𝗿𝗍𝗂, also this heritage advocate historian regarding history and heritage advocate 𝗕𝗵𝗿𝗍𝗂. With the influx of mainland Chinese from Hong Kong, Taiwanese, Hong Kongers na ba ni sila? Ang taga Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And is the Filipino Chinese community receptive to them in many aspects, including relationships? Would the Chinese Filipinos or Cebuano Chinese or the Chinese Mestizos more receptive to these pure Chinese from the mainland China, from Hong Kong or Taiwan? Or
Their culture, their customs and attitudes would differ already from the customs and attitudes that are prevalent in the Filipino Chinese mestizos. So I don't know. I have a friend whose daughter got married to somebody from mainland China. Well, it's maybe because like the mainland Chinese came here and became an associate, and so they got married eventually. So I don't know if, let's say, offhand, how open are the Chinese mestizos getting married to those from mainland China. I'm not. I don't think I am in the position to answer that, because
Yes.
it's a bit, it's too broad. It depends on the situation, I guess.
Yes. So please tell us now, this is our last question. So we will have the reaction in a while from the Gavin, and also the questions from the on-site audience, if we still have questions online. So please tell us about, what do you think, what is your view about the situation right now of the Chinese mestizo in Cebu, or
Okay. I prepared a more or less a sort of conclusion to all these things, this sharing. And I said, and I would like to put forth that there is a cyclical pattern of migration. Upon establishing roots, one gets to integrate into the society by subsuming one's cultural otherness into the new culture, which happened in the 1800s till the turn of the century. And when full cultural assimilation has taken place, one becomes truly Cebuano, meaning fighting in World War II as guerrillas or as soldiers side by side with Cebuanos as Cebuanos. Then the new migrants in the latter eras struggled to validate their sense of personhood in their straddling of the two cultures, preserve the tradition as they take on a Cebuano Chinese personality. That was the reality in post-World War II Chinese mestizo at the time of my growing up years. The generations after me, my sons and my grandchildren's reality are no longer the same. They hardly speak Chinese, if at all. They act Filipino as they think Filipino. And so the cycle is once more complete.
yay, daghang salamat. Very beautiful conclusion. But we have questions. So this is you with this. Is this you? In the photo.
That is the official engagement. The engagement is really for the Chinese, especially the pure Chinese. They consider it as a wedding. Once you are engaged, once you would go through a tinghon, and the tinghon will not push through, it's very hard for you to recover, especially the women, because you exchange wedding rings during the tinghon, and so that's officially the the photo that
Yeah, you look so
puts me into.
beautiful. And then your husband looks so like Bruce Lee. Also, tell us why you fell in love with him.
Well,
Wala na tahanig ko an Marites talk show na from mystery to Marites. So, what are his characteristics that made you fall? Ganun na fall.
Actually, I observed him, and what made me decide to say yes to the whole thing was his love for children. I watched him interact with the little ones while he was courting me, and he was very open to children. He played with them. He spent time with them, and somebody who is kind to children is a kind person. And because he is pure Chinese, he really respects his elders. He really listens to the parents.
Yes, thank you for sharing the beautiful love story. So, so, so it's because of the children. If not for that, so do you still remember the one, the Cebuano? You completely forgot him when you saw this this pure Chinese who loves children.
Again, what
You
is the question?
completely forgot that other one.
No, I would like to take that up because I feel guilty about that. No, nobody should be subjected to a breakup that does not have any reason between the two of you. I mean, when you break up with somebody, it's because I don't like you, or there's something wrong with the relationship, or this thing it has no future or whatever. But no, when I broke up with him, I said I have to break up with you because I cannot go against my father,
Yeah,
and I am afraid that eventually when we will be having our own home, anything happens in our relationship, we would always see gagabaan ta. It's a karma that is on us, and I don't like that sword, dangling on our heads. And since you will never, one thing also with him is that since you will never bow down to my father, in fact, you talk against him to others, which reached my father. I mean, I see no future to this relationship at all. But it really broke him. I mean, he really was very distraught because no person should be subjected to that. So, one of the regrets in my life was that breaking up for the reason that I obeyed my father.
yeah, it's a very heartbreaking story, really. So we have more interaction right now. So we have someone from the Cebu Association of Tour Guides, Mons Mabitad, and also um, there is a comment from Ryle J. Grate, Ryle J. Grate. One story I remembered about why the Chinese are successful in business is through cooperation and camaraderie among the Chinese people. Is this true?
Yes. And when somebody is down, the others will help. And we also value our word of honor. If I lend you money now and you promise to repay after a period of time, we know that you will do it. There's no written thing about it. And if sometimes that can never take place, it's out of the kindness of the lender to just let it be. So it's that setup that makes the Chinese, be more successful in their ventures, because there's more than anything else they help. There's nothing about igi, getting masuya. it's really more, we help because he needs help, then we help. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Miss Mayen. So there is a comment from 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗀. She says, just same to us. We have my lahing Chinese pero looks very Pinoy. And then our dance master from the National Commission for Culture and the Arts Dance Committee. Is a member and choreographer of our 2023 Sinulog sa Pamgras. He says, Ma'am Marlinda, thank you for being brave to open up your story.
It's very brave
She's
to be
very
opening
brave.
this up because this is taboo. I will be subjected to a lot of criticisms, I know, but I have to take this up because this is the reality that we should face and face openly.
So daghang salamat. So we are privileged to know about these stories. And so there is another comment from Cabino. During the Spanish colonial period, Philippine-born Insular Spanish were looked down upon by Spain-born Peninsulares. There was also there's also discrimination among Chinese born in China and the ones born here. Is there a discrimination regarding those Chinese born really in China and the Chinese born in the Philippines?
Here, during Spanish time or now?
After right now, is there no more?
No, I don't think so. In fact, in this situation now, there's respect to the parents who came from China. There's really more respect. I mean, there's no discrimination at all.
Yes. So it's different. Like of course, during the Spanish period, the Spaniards favored the Chinese who became Christianized, or even the Chinese mestizo, because the Spaniards considered them already as natives. So there is a question or a comment from 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗃 again. Hello, Madam Marlinda. Manalili Street is sometimes labeled by others as Cebu's Little Chinatown. Do you agree? Manalili as being called a Little Chinatown?
Manalili?
Yes, Manalili Street.
I think so. The Little Chinatown now, aside from the old Chinatown, but actually, I really do agree with this thing that the whole of Cebu is one big Chinatown. I mean, everywhere you go, you have a Chinese store or a Chinese family we're all over. We're all over, whether we look Chinese or not. We're all over.
Yes.
And if you look at the book of Dr. Mike, the names of the early Chinese who subsumed their Chinese roots are what we consider Filipino, the old Filipino family names. So you'll realize that these old Filipino, Cebuano family names that you thought were just Cebuano are really Cebuano Chinese mestizo.
Yes. So you would know more about that, about the names of those families living in Parian and those families living in the towns outside of Cebu City, in the towns in the south of Cebu and north of Cebu. These are all listed here in the Chinese Mestizos of Cebu City. And speaking about that, we would now get the reaction of our reactor, who is mentioned in this book in the introduction by Dr. Michael Cullinane. So our reactor, we would now like to go to the reactions, and after that, if there are more questions from the audience, we would like to entertain the questions.
I am curious about Gavin, what he will say about my sharing, because he is the historian par excellence.
So now we would now like to please. So we would now like to get the reaction from writer and digital media and print journalist. He graduated psychology from the University of the Philippines, Cebu. I don't know other things that I should give as an introduction. So please help me welcome the Chinese mestizo, Gavin Sanson Bagares, for his reaction.
Good afternoon, everyone. How do we say this, Mayen? Ho'am? Ho'epo?
Ho'epo.
Ho'epo. Ho'epo. So I am a belated Chinese adherent because when I was growing up, we always thought we were Filipino. And we had a Chinese renter there in Tinago that unfortunately we were children, or maybe fortunately, we called them INSIK GYOD something, no? So, and then somebody pointed out later that you look more Chinese than us. So I said, oh my God. And then later on, when I was growing up, teenager, I was edited by Mayen, one of my most important editors way back, Southern Star Magazine. So we go a long way back with Mayen.
True.
Yeah, so somebody said, there's this book by Conching Briones, Life in Old Parian. And then I started reading it, pouring through it. I think it came out in 1981, 82. So I realized that we were actually Chinese mestizos. So the family already thought we were Filipino. No one said we were Chinese, but some people said that we look Chinese, very Chinese. So I began to research. I contacted my colonnade. We had a very long correspondence. It's like a master's degree when you really correspond with an author, with a researcher on Cebu, Chinese mestizos, and on the parallel side, on the Chinese, because you cannot really write on the Chinese mestizos without writing or researching on the Chinese. So what I can say is that beginning perhaps in the 1990s, when China became more important worldwide, when its profile in the world became bigger and more visible, that the Chinese mestizos of Cebu became more, happy to say, oh, we have Chinese bloodline, that I came from, our family came from China. Although possibly not one of the Chinese mestizos can remember where they came from in China. It's just a generalization. We came from Xiamen or Guangdong, which is a old canton, because these were the two producers. They gave the Philippines the Chinese population. Guangdong, which is not so far from Manila, ancient Cathay or Canton, and then there's Xiamen or the Fujian province. So most of the Chinese in the Philippines came from those two provinces. One was Cantonese speaking, the other one is Hokkien speaking. So, but I think we should also, it's important for later researchers to find out, maybe these are just the doorways to the Philippines, but maybe there were Chinese who came from farther north, who went down south, and then came to the Philippines via this route. So maybe not all of them, just maybe, not all of them were really Cantonese or Hokkien or Fujianese. But that's just one of the theories I'm playing up with, because I saw this lady in Manalili Street that was mentioned earlier. She ran a dim sum, I think it's right across Manila Food Shop, and she is Mandarin. She came from Shanghai. So maybe this is a reality, more of a reality after 1949, when China became communist, and a lot of Chinese moved to the closest country, the Philippines, with a reputation for being friendly to the Chinese. Because even Manila has a parian. Of course, it's the oldest parian in the world. And many of the families in Manila, not as much discussed as it is in Cebu, were or are Chinese mestizos. They have Chinese bloodline. We have even the owner of Rustan, Stan Toko, is obviously Chinese, and so many others. So there is an emphasis on China now because of China's prominence, but it has always been a part of Cebu, the Chineseness. And as an aside, I'd like to say that Mayan looked very pretty there in her tinghon. She looks like she's even better looking than Sharon Cuneta. They were trying to compare her with Sharon, but Yasoy, ha, Mayan, you're so beautiful. Yeah. So, yeah. So, Mayan's journey, it's very important to, she shared it. It's very nice story. It can be another Mano Po Cebu version. So I think any director out there who's willing to a producer and a scriptwriter, it's even more interesting than the Mano Po movies because it's less cliched. It's more realistic. I really loved it. Don't you? Yeah. So anyway, what else can I say? Anyway, the Chinese mestizos, most of them unfortunately were in the 19th century. Many of them wanted to pass themselves off not as Chinese nor as Filipino, but descendants of, like the Veloso family. They created this fantastic family tree stating that they are Portuguese. They were Portuguese. Yeah. And then the Borromeo family, I came across an account that they were Italian. So I think there's a bit of a shame to say they were Chinese. Especially, I think, when the 1880s came and the ethnic Chinese of the time, no longer the pure Chinese from China, settled already in the Lutao district, which we examined that, Ma'am Ellen, at the back of City Hall. That's the Lutao district. Of course, it's already reclaimed. It looks different, but the new Chinese uh, immigrants in the 1880s, they formed their own corporation, government, which was the Gremio de Chino. And we have Lucio Oy Herrera, we have Nicasio Chong Veloso there. And Nicasio Chong Veloso had a quarrel with Lucio Herrera and decided not to be part anymore of the Chinese Gremio and made his journey to become more Filipino. Married Cebuana, Spanish Chinese mestiza. And so Nicasio Chong Veloso became more known on the side of the non-Chinese, and Lucio Herrera became more continued to be more Chinese because of that little competition for leadership in the Gremio de Chino. So Nicasio Chong Veloso has sons, grandchildren. We know them as Singson, Osmeña, Velez. So in fact, today, still very recent history, these families still have very good amount of Chinese blood. Yeah, but they don't want to, yeah. So I'll wrap it up by saying that Mayan really did a good job. And Mayan, that has to be written. Have you done a biography? That has to be written, and you do agree with me that it has to become a movie, right? So thank you. Thank you very much.
Yaga-yagaon kay ka.
Dahil salamat for the reaction to Chinese Mestizo Gavin Sanson Bagares, whose ancestor figured in the story of Juan Diong. And Gavin is proudly an ancestor of land grabbers. But of course, there are also Sanson who were revolutionaries in the 1898. There are also Sanson in the revolution, leaders in the revolution against Spain. So you have both. There is an oppressor and a fighter with against the oppressor.
Agripina,
Yes.
we were just talking about genealogy the other day, and you know, you must never change anything, Gavin. If the finding says that your ancestor was land grabbing, do not clean it up. It's a mortal sin.
So, dahil salamat, Gabi. So, there is a reaction also, a comment from Ang Ren Earl po. Tosha, the Ma'am Marlinda, for sharing your stories. We just celebrated our Lunar New Year. What interesting Chinese practices do you still do with your family during the Chinese New Year? Have there been changes in the practices over the years, or the practices, or the practices still remain?
Yeah, it still remains. I mean, it is a tradition, and so we always get together. Unfortunately, the older ones, our elders, are no longer around. So when Mama and Papa were still around, we would go to them, and when my sons were children, they always look forward to that thing of the ang pao, because Mama would always have ang pao for them, the red packets for money, and that is you. There are 5 days of the new year where you can fulfill all the things that you're supposed to do for the new year. One is to go to the temple, visit your parents, you pay your debts, you go to you there are five. You clean your house, you there are five. I'll remember what, but at least those are the things that you do. So you have 5 days to do it. 2 days before, with cleaning the house and all that, should be 2 days before, and then the 3 days after that is what you'll do if you have not gone to the temple, or you've not paid your debts, or visit your friends, your good friends. On the day on the New Year itself, that's when you'll be with your parents. And if you are not with your, now I am the parent. I am now the amma. I am the grandmother. So my grandchildren will have to come to me. If they will not come to me, they will not have any angpao. Because filial devotion or filial reverence, you show during New Year. You show you show is this ancestral worship or veneration during New Year. So you go to the what's this of your parents, and give flowers and offer wine and offer wine and flowers and incense. We did that in during the New Year Mass at Sacred Heart Church, because the Catholic Chinese, they consider that as part of it's Christian. When you honor your father and your mother, and you give an offering of those things, which you will of course share after. I would like to tell you, Agrippina, I acquired the taste for 𝗏𝗏𝗏. It's a vegetable thing that they offer for New Year, and during the times that we would make offering for our ancestors, because Mama would give it to us, to the different children, and it was only I who would eat it. So I acquired a taste for 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and 𝘾𝗵𝗂𝗏 and 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. That's the pumpkin pie and radish pie, radish cake. Okay, is radish cake and pumpkin cake. So these we offer. You make an offering to your ancestors during New Year. That's part of it. You have to wear a red or auspicious color. Usually red or gold or green. But usually we Chinese, we wear red, and we make offerings at the altar of our ancestors. It is not to adore, it is just to give our respect in their memory, because they are part of us always. There's always an altar of our father, grandfather at the house.
Yes.
We still do that.
Thank you for sharing the practices. It's actually has similar. The Chinese actually has similar practices with even our ancestors, the natives in Cebu, in the Visayas, or in our archipelago, because in the past, our ancestors used also to revere their anitos or their ancestors. So
Yeah.
it's an Asian thing. It's an Asian culture to give respect to our ancestors.
Yes.
So we have the last few. Stay tuned for our very exciting, well-awaited quiz with prize, trivia quiz with prizes. We still have trivia quiz with prizes coming up. So there is a reaction from Bobby Bargamento, and he says, Mama Linda is a well-respected Cebuano theater actress on
Thank you.
stage. I remembered her in Lute Song musical play, a Chinese play directed by Madame Delia Alinio Villacastin.
Yes.
Multi-talented sad ni, writer, literary writer, stage
I would like to plug my play. We're going on stage April 1 and 2. It's Steel Magnolias.
Yeah. Congratulations for that play. So there is a reaction comment from Cabino. Cebu is one big Chinatown. And I remember his comment a while ago that lumpia and pancit, would you agree that it is now Filipino with Chinese influence and not, these are not Chinese food, but Filipino food with Chinese
Yeah,
influence?
we have taken it unto ourselves, the
Yes.
lumpia and the 𝗏𝗶𝗵. We have the term there is 𝗏𝗶𝗵. The lumpia, yes.
Vivaris Derek says, thank you for the insights of the life and culture of a Cebuano Chinese. This will give me a background of my ancestors, Apuhan, in the old Parian district. And Ang Ren Earl Po says, congrats to Cebu Heritage Hotel, 𝗏𝗃𝗃 for this event. To all, 𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗀𝗃 𝘃𝗏𝗃.
Yes.
Is this?
𝗃𝗃𝗏𝗃. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wishing you prosperity.
Yes.
But Sini 𝘃𝗏𝗃 is literally Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Ang Ren Earl Po. so is this your relative or
Who's that?
Po?
Kimpo. He's
Ang
calling me Kimpo.
No.
Is he?
His Facebook name is Ang Ren Earl Po.
Earl
Po.
Po.
The last name is Po.
Okay.
So dagang salamat, Sheshe, for joining. And then so we have also trivia quest with exciting prizes. So before Miss Mayan would give her closing words for this event, so we would now like to have this. The first question is for the on-site audience. Please, Kobe, please remove the. So now the first question is for the on-site audience. The one who would like to answer would go to the microphone and I'll raise his or her hand, and I would call you and go to the microphone. And the prize of this question would be a dish inspired by the Chinese and named in honor of this hero of the 1898 Cebu Revolution from the Gremio de Chino. So we have the bestseller dish, 𝗵𝗶 ni Lucio Herrera. And then, so this is the question. Papagay ko mo question kina raise na og hand si Kuan. So the question is this, very easy question for the on-site audience. Name the area in Cebu City where the Chinese and the Chinese Mestizos lived during the Spanish period. So nauna man ni una ni og race kay ganina pa. Disqualified na siya. Sige, ikaw na lang. In case masayop. So, who was the first? Nakakita mo, who was the first to raise the hand? Kinsa, si? Kani siya? Sige, give chance ko, no? So, give your name. Please give your name.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Yes, what's your name?
My name is 𝗵𝗵𝗏𝗏𝗏, but in Chinese, I am 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏
And yes. So,
And my answer is Parian.
Congratulations! You win the 𝗵𝗶 ni Lucio Herrera. It's a bestseller dish at our 𝗃𝗶𝗃 ni Lumaya. So the next question is a question for the online audience only. So this question is for those online. So, but not here. But of course, if the online audience wouldn't answer, we would give chance to the on-site audience. So the next question, the prize for this is from the Alima Native Massage, where you will get an orasyon during your this is a kawa bath with the hot water warm water bath with herbs and flowers, a therapeutic bath at our 𝗏𝗲𝗀𝗏𝙀. So 𝗏𝗵𝗃𝗀, and the question is this. This is, hala, I guess this was not mentioned. I wasn't able to ask Dr. Mike for the wasn't we were the answer for this was not mentioned. I discussed this with Dr. Mike in our meeting the other day, but we were not able to discuss this today. But the question stays. So the question is this. This is for the online audience, if you would know. If not, we would change the question. During the Spanish period, what year was the Cebu port open to foreign trade? Lisod kayo, wala ni ma-mention no, during the discussion. So I forgot to Kim. What year? Wala si Gavin Ray maka-answer ali. Pwede ka answer. Di, online magka-answer. Wa ka kakune. So, if no one would answer, wala yung nag-answer? Nay nag-answer? Wala na may nag-answer. Ay, mga wrong answer man. Sorry. In the Spanish period. So, the Spanish period is from the 1565 to 1898. Ha? Nagtuon ka sa atong wall ko ano, wall nga timeline. Congratulate, pero wa man ka i-answer man nimo online. Or mo answer na lang ka. Hanay ni answer. Nay nakauna kang Ellen. Ay, congratulations to all. To the congratulations to the president of the Flag Tour Guides for knowing the answer. So you would really be able, we're so happy that our tour guides know our history, that the Cebu port was closed but was open to foreign trade again, to international trade in 1860. And that's the time that the Chinese, the pure Chinese, came back to Cebu. So before that, it was the Chinese Mestizos who dominated the economy of Cebu. But when the Chinese came, so naana sila kompetensya. So nabalik na. Oh, nabalik na. So thank you for showing this today in history of Cebu about the opening up of the trade, because that was the decree. It was that please show it again. So it was the decree declaring that the Cebu port would now be open. May you show it again? Ma-show pa to. It is a decree declaring that the Cebu port will now be open. The Cebu port is officially open for international trade. That's July 30, 1860. So this is kanang unsa tay 𝗏𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗏, so magkawa gid this kuan. You can choose if you want to become a tinua with ginger, sea salt and lemongrass tanglad. So or you can choose to have flower bath or 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 unsa pagali ito? Ilbas 𝗏𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗏. So or a flower bath or a milk bath. So that's the prize for this question. And the third and final question, and this is this is a very easy question. This is for everyone online and on site, but you may answer through the comment section of the Facebook Live event. So you can only answer through the Facebook Live event, and this is the question. No, the prize is a 5-hour stay in our Rooms for Heroes and a chance to soak in our saltwater dipping pool at 𝗏𝗲𝗀𝗏𝙀. Soak and chill. So chill for 5 hours and soak at the 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗏. So this is the question. Name a Chinese or Chinese mestizo who joined the revolution in Cebu against Spain. So we have this, Dr. Michael Lunane discussed this also. So you answer through the comment section. So there are actually so many answers for this. So, unsa man ni? Okay, unsa man ni si Ferdinand Ascaraga, the Hall of Famer Ferdinand Ascaraga, would we ato na siya i-lift iyang kuan, iyang Hall of Fame kanang disqualification because he's always winning our trivia quizzes. So, wala na laing mo answer diha. Wala na. Pulos ni mga Hall of Famer atong mga kuan kanang. So, Drea Way, you answered the Francisco Llamas is actually his sister was married to a Chinese. So, Francisco Llamas was in the part of the Gremio de Naturales. So, not the correct answer. Juan Diong, no. Juan Diong is a native. So, wala tay choice, ani. So, Bruno, Nabay Kui nga Bruno sa in our list. So there is a Kui, but I'm not sure if Bruno is one of the names of the Kui who joined the revolution. So kuan na lang, so we give chance to kuan. Congratulations to he was the first to give the answer. Lucio Herrera was the pure Chinese who got married to a Cebuana, and he was the treasurer of war of the Manggugubot sa Sugbo sa 1898 when they had a meeting at Isidro Gibilondo's house, who was Chinese. He was a Spanish mestizo. So congratulations to Ferdinand Ascaraga, who is in his Chinese colored kanang barong. So daghang salamat. So join us again. So we will have the closing words in a few minutes, in a few seconds from Miss Mayen. So join us again in our another exciting event. We will have the 𝗖𝗵𝗂𝗃, the restrictions and physical intimacies during the Spanish period, about the revolts that happened triggered by the restrictions to the pre-colonial sex practices of the natives. And also on that day, we will also show again, we will have the display again of the pre-colonial sex gadgets that we showed during the 𝗕𝗵𝗂 𝘃𝗵𝗂 in the Red Room. So we would be having again that display of the sex practices and pre-colonial gadgets of the Cebuanos and the Visayans. So of course, join us in the Lami nga event on February 28th for for nasumpay ang iyot sa Lami. Food, Lami ni nga food on February 28th sa ikapitong tuig sa Kapihan ni Lumaya. Yes, and so thank you to Dr. Mike Collinane for joining us, and he had to go home because it's 4 a.m. already at their place in Wisconsin. And then so right now we would like to ask our on-site panelist, Miss Mayen 𝗏𝗏𝗏, for her closing words for this event.
It's very hard to have the last say because you don't know how many people are there out the line at this point. But I would like to thank you for joining with us in this reality of the Chinese mestizo in this era, in the contemporary times, starting from the Spanish time. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for being one of us, for those who are Chinese mestizos like me, and for the Filipinos who are curious, now you know better. And for my relatives, hope you will not bludgeon me to death after this. But it is always good to face the truth, whether it's painful or not. And I would like to, again, to thank all of you for your time. 谢谢各位. 谢谢你们.
Daghang salamat, Miss Mayen. So our audience also, thank you for joining us. Thank you to those on site and online. Congratulations to the winners. Thank you very much for the insights from our panelists, and we thank them for sharing their researches to Dr. So for sharing the stories of the Chinese mestizos in Cebu from Miss Marlinda Angbetiktan. So daghang salamat sad to our partners, the University of San Carlos Center for Social Research and Education, FLOG Tour Guides, Museo Sugbo, the Central Visayas Association of Museums, the Andy Heritage Center, 𝗖𝗵 2020, and also for the National Quincentennial Committee page that is showing this broadcast right now. Daghang salamat. Happy Lunar New Year to everyone.